Hi everybody, this is Chapter 7 from our Poston text. We're going to be discussing performance-based budget packages, really more than anything else on who assigns certain roles to who is doing what. The role of the program manager is important because this is the person who oversees all budgeting decisions and the appropriate steps. This chapter will align with the personnel chapter and really help to discover the appropriateness of how to develop programming, who's in charge, and who's responsible for it. So we're going to briefly mention the 8 key steps. I'm going to give you a chance to read these and look over them. I'm only going to focus on 4 of these that I personally think are important, that really relate to stuff that will continue on no matter what institution you're working at, whether it's in this state or another state, big district or small district. So here are the first 4, and here are the next 4. So, as I said, I'm only going to talk about number 3, number 4, number 5, and number 8 because I think they matter and they're specific to different ways that you can approach budgeting and approach how you're going to be looking at kind of the roles that people have in making financial decisions. So, I think number 3 is huge because it really looks at what alternative means of support are. Alternative class sizes, alternative configurations, things like that. When you're looking at different measures of support, you have to be able to know what 90% looks like, what 95% looks like, what 100% looks like, and what 105% looks like. If I can impart one thing on all of you, it's kind of this notion of you need to know what will make your school work at an optimal level and what would make your school better. All of you know what an ideal class size is in your mind. All of you know what your ideal priorities are. As we've said throughout this class, mine are different than yours are. You are individuals and you know what your district needs and what your students need. So you have to kind of see what the alternatives look like and see where that could be coming from and how the personnel function really can supply that. What is your class size? What can you most optimally afford and what's most important? So the other issue is really how are the functions performed? What's the idea of centralization versus decentralization? Who's responsible for decisions? Should the cafeteria food be made at a facility and then shipped in? Should everything be done internally at each individual school? Should the custodial function be done directly inside the organization? Or should that be something that we move to central administration and then they decentralize it? What's the most cost effective? What's the most important? Should we have night security guards? Should we have security guards that are outsourced? These are big financial decisions, but there are different ways of performing each function, and there are different things that are going to be cost effective for the district. The key thing that you need to think about is this is not just the way that the organization has always run, it's the way that the organization has evolved over time. What was effective in 1995 is not effective in 2015 and will not be effective in 2035. So I take away this notion of levels of effort because this is the way that you need to say what 90% looks like, 95% looks like, 100% looks like, and 105% looks like. If you can plan this level and you can say what more looks like but what less looks like, that is huge because you can make a better argument to a school board or even the superintendent regarding cost. If you're the superintendent, you need to have in your mind what 5% more looks like and what 5% less looks like. You can't go into any of these things saying this is what I want and this is what I expect. You have to know what the least amount looks like and what more than you're expecting looks like. And obviously my budgeting was all related to technology, but I always did that. I knew that I wanted a classroom that had a minimum of 24 computers in each lab. That was my goal and that was my vision. I got 27, that was great because then I had some spares. But then when we were assigning classes that had 26 and 27 students, we didn't have spares anymore. What would have happened if the district only could have provided me with 20 computers? Would the kids have shared? So you need to think about what 95% looks like, 100%, and what 105% looks like. and how those the levels of effort are expected. This is my big idea from this chapter, and I think the one takeaway message you need to have. So, package for funding is important, but it's the word I've been saying this entire class. It's this notion and it's this idea of transparency. You have to be transparent in the approach that you have within the school district. You have to show what money you need, what money would help, what money is essential, and you have to publicize any funds that you need. I keep saying this, and you have to understand you are a superintendent in a human services field. In any business, any organization, you would make personnel decisions if the program changed, if the art program lessened in its importance, if the music program had 200 students in the marching band and then was down to 150, if the third grade had a massive population swell and the second grade didn't. Staff is going to oscillate, programs are going to oscillate. You are not in the position to make friends. You serve students. Everything that you say needs to say, I'm doing this because this is in the best interest of students. And if you can do that, that's the best that you can do, and that's what you should be doing. Abandonment. It's the least popular decision because we're in human services, but it's still something that you do. It's harsh and unpleasant, but in every other industry, it's acceptable. It's acceptable. You can cut. You're allowed to cut. But in education, it's not, because it's a human field and it's a human service. So that creates a challenge and that creates a problem as well. So what should these package descriptions look like? What should you have? You should have a title that communicates the program, a statement of the purpose. Why do you need this money? Why do you need this funding? Why is this important? And once again, that statement needs to say student, student, student in it. Cost and benefit of the activity or program level, consequences of funding or not funding, methods for evaluating it. We're going to talk about evaluation way later on in the last chapter. We're going to look at ways to evaluate, but you need to have a measurable and a deliverable. That's going to look different for every single program. So people are skeptical when it comes to budgeting. You need to show this is what the budget looked like 2 years ago or 3 years ago. The other thing that I don't really mention here that I think is important, that I will probably add to this eventually, is this notion of other districts. If you have a comparable, what one district looks like that's comparable to the other, what they're investing in the budgeting, these are public documents, this helps. So your authenticity of how resources are allocated in comparable District A and comparable District B is equally as important as well. So this was one of the ideas that Poston spoke about that I kind of agree with, but I want to go over each one of these a little at a time. You know, some of these I agree with, some of these I disagree with, but I think you need to interpret them. I think this is also organizationally specific. Number one, affluent schools are favored with more non-categorical dollars than poor schools. Absolutely, 100%, because they can raise taxes and parents are going to invest in non-categorical expenses. Normally your extracurricular activities, your funding for after-school programs, of course, because that's something that affluent parents are going to do. Number two that's mentioned, I highly disagree with, but I think this is district specific. I would make the argument that this is more of a rural and suburban argument than it is a poor versus non-poor district. We know that teacher salary costs are unevenly distributed across schools, with teachers in high poverty schools who are paid at the lower end of the salary scale. Don't you dare say that in Ohio or Pennsylvania. If you were in Cleveland right now and you could survive Cleveland public schools, you would be making a ton more money than you would in a suburban school, and same with Philadelphia. Those teachers are paid well, they're paid very well, but you're dealing with a lot more problems that you wouldn't deal with in a suburban environment. Federal dollars are funneled disproportionately to affluent schools. I think this is case-by-case basis as well. I'm not too sold on that idea, but I am sold on subsidies to equalize and offset between high poverty schools. They are shortchanged because the subsidy money that comes into the affluent schools can be funneled to the right locations, can be funneled to improving special ed and special services. Or in a high poverty district, that money is funneled to sustain it or to make it workable. And we're in an affluent school district, it's not going to be the case. So the book talks about weighting. I don't need to talk about weighting. Oklahoma already does this. So really, the book is justifying that you need to weight per pupil expenditures. Our state's a leader in this. We're fine. We do weighting already. So asymmetrical employee compensation. So this is this notion of that we distribute salaries throughout schools in the district, meaning that what I think in one school, this school has less problems and less challenges, so the salaries need to be less than the higher end district. It's good to do that. I think it's important to level the difference in playing field. You all know one of my areas of interest is this notion of the jump step, the magical $20,000, $30,000 raise you get between two particular years. I kind of have an issue with that. I see advantages for evenly distributing the salaries, meaning that you base it on a contingency, years of experience perhaps. I mean, that's the way it works in unionized environments, whether you agree with that or not. It does, and it at least means something, but there can also be negatives with that as well. I would argue one teaching job is a lot more difficult than another teaching job. Not to pick on these special subject areas, because I was a special subject area. What I did in a marketing class or a law class, nobody cared about. So I think that's different than somebody who's in an 11th grade English or an 8th grade math class. They're dealing with a lot more, and I think that's important. So that's it. That's really the ideas that I want you to come up with for this chapter. The next chapter we're really going to stress, and we're really going to look at kind of what budgeting priorities look like in ways that you can use that weight in a way that balances and makes things fair for you. Thank you.